Jesus is asked, "Who is my neighbor?" He answers with a story, and ends by asking a different question. The Samaritan is the famous surprise. But the changed question is where the parable really turns. Before the story, the legal expert asks whom the word neighbor includes. After the story, Jesus asks which traveler became a neighbor to the wounded man. One question looks for a boundary, the other looks at an action. To see why that change matters, we have to begin before anyone reaches the road. Luke introduces an expert in the Torah who asks Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus responds, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" The expert joins two passages from the Torah. From Deuteronomy, "Love God with your whole being." From Leviticus, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus tells him that his answer is correct. Then he says, "Do this, and you will live." The parable grows out of Torah rather than setting Torah against compassion. The command to love the neighbor is already part of the scriptural world both men share. Their discussion is about what faithful obedience looks like in practice. Then Luke says the expert wanted to justify himself, so he asked, "And who is my neighbor?" That was a real interpretive question. Leviticus 19 places neighbor love among concrete commands about ordinary community life: justice, wages, speech, vulnerability, and responsibility toward others. Later in the same chapter, Israel is commanded to love the Jer, a resident outsider living among the community, as oneself. Surviving Jewish writings from the centuries around Jesus show that communities could draw their social and moral boundaries in different ways. The evidence therefore points to a living debate about how the command was practiced, not one narrow definition held by every Jewish group. The expert may be asking how far the command reaches. He may be defending the way he already understands it. Luke leaves the exact calculation outside the frame. Jesus answers without giving him a new list. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Robbers strip him, beat him, and leave him half dead. Luke gives him no ethnic, religious, occupational, or social label. Before the three travelers arrive, he is simply a human being in need. The road descended from the Judean hills toward the Jordan Valley, roughly 18 miles, with a drop of about 3,000 feet. Josephus described the country toward Jerusalem as desert and rocky. The terrain makes a roadside attack plausible. It also helps separate the setting from later embellishment. This investigation found no reliable first-century attestation of the popular name, the Bloody Way. The surviving sources likewise give us no basis for calling it the most dangerous road in Judea. Jesus next introduces a priest. Luke explicitly says that he is going down the road. He sees the wounded man and passes by on the other side. Then a Levite comes to the same place. He also sees the man and passes by. Priests and Levites held different roles, but both were recognizable through their association with Israel's temple life. The story uses that recognition to create expectation. It does not require us to turn either man into a symbol for Judaism as a whole, or to imagine that religious status automatically made them wealthy or powerful. Why they pass by has become one of the most familiar explanations attached to the parable. Corpse impurity was a real concern in the Torah, and priests had special restrictions concerning contact with the dead. New Testament scholar Richard Bauckham has argued that the priest may face a genuine legal dilemma. The traveler could appear dead or could die while being helped. But the scene resists a simple verdict. The wounded man is described as half dead, not as a confirmed corpse. The story never places either traveler on the way to perform temple service. And a rule stated for priests cannot simply be transferred to the Levite. Other scholars therefore think Luke gives too little evidence to assign ritual purity as the motive. The text keeps their inner reasoning hidden and gives us something more concrete. Both men see the victim, and both preserve their distance. What the story shows is action. Then the third traveler appears. He is a Samaritan. Today, Good Samaritan is a positive expression. In Luke's scene, however, Samaritan still carries social and religious tension. Samaritans worshiped the God of Israel and based their religious life on the Torah, or Pentateuch. They understood themselves within Israel's inheritance, but they regarded Mount Gerizim, rather than Jerusalem, as the chosen sacred center, and they maintained their own priesthood. Gerizim was more than a different worship location. It represented a competing claim about where Israel's sacred story was centered, and which community preserved it faithfully. That made the disagreement close, scriptural, and difficult, not simply a clash between believers and outsiders. Judeans and Samaritans therefore inhabited overlapping worlds. They shared the Torah, geography, and competing claims about Israel's sacred inheritance. They were also divided over sanctuary, authority, and communal identity. Josephus preserves both contact and conflict. He says it was customary for Galileans traveling to Jerusalem for the festivals to pass through Samaritan territory. He also records episodes in which violence between the communities became deadly. Josephus writes from a Judean perspective and needs to be read critically. Even so, his account rules out two easy pictures: total separation and peaceful unity. The Samaritan was not merely a remote foreigner. He represented a nearby and contested other, close enough to share much of Israel's world, yet located across a serious communal boundary. That proximity gives the character more historical weight than the label outsider can carry by itself. That relationship is difficult to reproduce with a single modern analogy. Replacing the Samaritan with any disliked political or ethnic group may create an emotional parallel, but it can erase the shared Torah, disputed inheritance, and rival sacred centers that gave the ancient identity its particular force. Luke's wider narrative keeps that complexity. In Luke 9, a Samaritan village refuses hospitality to Jesus and his disciples. In Luke 17, a healed Samaritan is the one who returns to give thanks. Samaritan characters never function as one fixed stereotype. Luke records no reaction from the audience when the Samaritan enters this parable. The historical evidence supports a more careful conclusion. The identity carried real tension, and a member of a disputed, Torah-shaped community is about to embody the Torah's command. The Samaritan sees the same wounded man. Unlike the first two travelers, he comes near. That movement is the first decisive contrast. All three travelers see. Only one closes the distance. What follows is not a burst of sympathy, but a series of practical decisions made under the pressure of an interrupted journey. He binds the wounds and pours on oil and wine. Ancient Mediterranean medical sources attest the use of wine and oils in treating wounds, though Luke offers no medical explanation or exact procedure. He places the man on his own animal. The Greek text leaves the species unnamed. He brings him to an inn, a public place of lodging, and cares for him there. The next day, he gives the innkeeper 2 denarii and promises to repay any additional expense when he returns. The payment is concrete. Its exact purchasing power in this situation is not. Luke supplies no room rate, food bill, nursing fee, or recovery schedule. So calculations that turn the coins into an exact number of days remain speculative. The stronger point is visible without that math. The Samaritan accepts responsibility for costs that have not yet been determined. Approach, bind, pour, carry, lodge, care, pay, return. Luke gives mercy visible form. The Samaritan crosses the distance the others preserve. His journey is interrupted. He uses what he carries, transports the wounded man, remains with him, pays in advance, and accepts a continuing obligation. The sequence expands at every step, from attention to bodily care, to property, to time, and finally to a future bill. Each action adds a new form of responsibility: proximity, touch, resources, transport, presence, payment, and return. Now the final question can do its work. The expert had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" In other words, whom does the term include? After the story, Jesus asks, "Which of these three, do you think, became a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" The verb is a form of ginomai, often translated become, though English versions render the clause in several ways. Was a neighbor, proved to be a neighbor, or became a neighbor. The verb matters, but the reframing rests on the entire exchange. Jesus makes the injured man the point of reference and asks the expert to evaluate the conduct of the three people who encountered him. The first question looks for the people included by the word neighbor. The final question asks which traveler acted as one. The expert answers, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus replies, "Go and do likewise." That instruction returns to the beginning of the conversation. The expert had correctly named the commandments. Jesus had already told him, "Do this." The parable now places the command inside a human crisis and asks him to recognize its fulfillment in a person whose communal identity did not make him the obvious model. The reversal, therefore, runs deeper than the wrong hero. The story moves from defining the recipient to recognizing neighborly action, and that action is performed by a Samaritan, a person across a real religious and social boundary, yet close enough to expose how unreliable identity labels can be as predictions of mercy. Several conclusions are firm. The discussion begins inside Torah. The wounded man remains unidentified. The priest and Levite are judged by what they do rather than by motives the story never reveals. The Samaritan belongs to a nearby, contested, Torah-shaped community, and mercy appears as a sustained sequence of costly actions. Readers may draw the broad implication that neighbor love cannot be confined to one's own group, but Luke reaches that implication through narrative rather than through a new abstract definition. Identity fails to predict mercy. Action supplies the answer. At the beginning, the question draws a circle around other people. Who counts as my neighbor? By the end, that circle has opened into a road. The question is no longer only where the obligation stops. It is which direction the listener will move when another person is lying in the path. The Samaritan matters because he makes the reversal impossible to dismiss as a lesson about respectable people doing respectable things. The final command does not ask the listener merely to approve of him. It asks the listener to go the way he went.